Okay, so where do you even begin with a story like this? It's like something ripped straight from a bad soap opera. But it's my life. My actual, messed up life. I'm Mark, by the way. Or I was Mark. Now I feel like some hollowed out version of him. It all started on a Tuesday. Just a regular, boring Tuesday. I came home from work. I'm a software engineer. Nothing exciting, expecting dinner and maybe an episode of whatever Sarah was binge watching on Netflix. Instead, I walked into a scene that felt wrong. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red-rimmed, a half-empty bottle of wine next to her. And David, my brother, my own freaking brother, was standing behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. He looked guilty, almost ashamed. "Hey guys," I said, trying to keep things normal, but my voice cracked a little. "What's going on?" Sarah took a deep breath, like she was steeling herself for something huge. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling, "we need to talk. Those words. Everyone knows those words. The prelude to a disaster." "Okay," I said slowly, pulling out a chair. "What's this about?" And then she dropped the bomb. "I'm leaving you, Mark." The room started spinning. I swear, for a second, I thought I was going to pass out. "Leaving?" We were happy, weren't we? Sure, we had our arguments like any couple, but leaving? That was unthinkable. "Leaving? What?" "What are you talking about, Sarah?" one stammered. And then came the kicker. "The reason." The one that still makes my head want to explode every time I think about it. It's because David and I were soulmates. Soulmates? I stared at her, then at David, then back at her. What in the actual hell was happening? Soulmates? I repeated, my voice rising. "Sarah, what are you talking about? Since when do you even believe in that? That crap." That's when she told me about the astrologer. Apparently, she'd been seeing this woman, Madame Evangeline, for a few months. Madame Evangeline had analyzed their birth charts, looked at the alignment of the planets, whatever, and the verdict was in. Sarah and David were destined to be together. Written in the stars. Freaking soulmates. "I know it sounds crazy, Mark," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face, "but I can't ignore this. It's bigger than us." David just stood there looking like he wanted to be swallowed up by the floor. He didn't say a word. I looked at them, at my wife, at my brother, and I felt this cold, hollow emptiness spreading through my chest. Betrayal. Confusion. Disbelief. It was all a swirling, nauseating mess. "So," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "you're leaving me for my brother because some fortune teller told you to?" Sarah nodded, her eyes pleading. "It's not just some fortune teller, Mark. It's fate. Fate. That's what she called it. Fate that had apparently been hanging out at family barbecues and holiday dinners for the past 5 years, completely unnoticed. That was it. That was the moment my life fractured. The moment everything I thought I knew about my world, about my marriage, about my brother, shattered into a million pieces. The bomb had dropped, and I was standing in the crater. And the worst part? I had absolutely no idea what to do next. The next few weeks were a blur, a horrible, agonizing blur. Sarah moved out, taking half of everything with her, not just furniture and belongings, but pieces of my life. Pieces of me? I spent most of my time in a state of numb shock. I went to work, went through the motions, but I was barely present. My colleagues noticed, of course. The concerned glances, the awkward silences, the hesitant offers of coffee and sympathy. I appreciated it, but nothing helped. Nothing filled the gaping hole in my chest. At night, I'd just sit in the dark, staring at the empty space on the couch where Sarah used to sit. Reruns of old movies played on the TV, but I wasn't watching them. I was replaying memories, going over every conversation, every argument, every shared moment, trying to find the clues I'd missed. Was I blind? Was I so wrapped up in my own little world that I didn't see this coming? Had Sarah and David been together for longer than I knew. The thought made my stomach churn. I tried to push it away, but it kept creeping back, a persistent, poisonous weed in my mind. I replayed the last few months in my head. The strange little changes in Sarah's behavior, the sudden interest in astrology, the late-night phone calls she'd claim were from a friend, the times she seemed distant. And David, David, my brother. We'd always been close, but lately he'd been different, more confident, more successful. He'd landed a huge promotion at work, bought a new car, started dressing better. He seemed happier. Now I knew why. The anger started to build, a slow burn at first, then a raging inferno. Anger at Sarah for being so gullible, so willing to throw away our marriage based on the word of some charlatan. Anger at David for betraying me, for stabbing me in the back in the most unimaginable way. And anger at myself for being so stupid, so trusting, so blind. I tried to talk to my parents about it, but they were just as confused as I was. They loved Sarah. They loved David. They couldn't understand how this could have happened. They kept saying things like, maybe it's just a phase, and give them time, they'll come to their senses. But I knew it wasn't a phase. This was real. This was happening. My wife was with my brother, because they were soulmates. Sound of a frustrated sigh. The worst part was the humiliation. The feeling that everyone was laughing at me behind my back. The whispers. The pitying looks. I felt like I was living in some kind of twisted reality show, and everyone else was in on the joke except me. I started avoiding social situations. I didn't want to see anyone, didn't want to talk to anyone. I just wanted to be alone, to wallow in my misery and try to make sense of the senseless. I tried to find some kind of closure, some way to move on. I started seeing a therapist, but it didn't really help. Talking about my feelings just made them feel even more raw and painful. I tried dating apps, but swiping through endless profiles of strangers just made me feel more alone. Everyone seemed so superficial, so fake. I couldn't imagine connecting with anyone, not after what had happened. I was stuck, trapped in this endless cycle of grief, anger, and confusion. I didn't know how to escape. I didn't know if I even wanted to. All I knew was that my life had been irrevocably changed, and I had no idea what the future held. It was sickening. That's the only word for it. Sickening. While I was drowning in my own misery, David was thriving. He seemed to be on top of the world. The promotion at work turned into another promotion. The new car became a fancier car. He started wearing designer clothes, going to expensive restaurants, taking exotic vacations. He was practically glowing. And Sarah? She looked radiant, happy, like she'd finally found her true purpose in life, like she was living some kind of fairy tale. They were everywhere. On social media, plastered across the faces of mutual friends, even just out in public. I couldn't escape it. It was a constant reminder of my failure, of my loss, of their happiness. I tried to avoid them, but it was impossible. We had the same friends, the same family. We lived in the same city. Our lives were intertwined, whether I liked it or not. And every time I saw them, this burning resentment would flare up inside me. It wasn't just jealousy, though that was definitely part of it. It was something more. Something suspicious. It was too perfect, too seamless. Like everything was falling into place for them a little too easily. David had always been average. A good guy, sure, but not exactly a high achiever. He'd always been a little bit in my shadow. And now, suddenly, he was this confident, successful, almost arrogant version of himself. It didn't make sense. I started to wonder if there was more to the story than I knew. More than just fate and soulmates. Could David have manipulated Sarah? Could he have somehow orchestrated this whole thing? The thought was outrageous, I knew, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed plausible. David had always been competitive, even if he didn't show it. He'd always wanted what I had: my success, my happiness, my wife, and now he had it all. The anger intensified, fueled by this growing suspicion. I couldn't just sit back and watch him live my life while I was left with nothing. I needed to know the truth. I needed to find out if David had somehow cheated his way to happiness. But how? I had no proof, no evidence, just a gut feeling that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Emily was Sarah's best friend, or had been Sarah's best friend. They'd had a falling out right after. Everything. Emily never bought into the whole soulmate thing. She was a lawyer, logical and pragmatic. She didn't believe in astrology, fortune tellers, or any of that new age nonsense. She was also fiercely loyal to Sarah, or at least, she had been. She had been a bridesmaid at our wedding. I knew she would be just as hurt and betrayed as I was. I hadn't spoken to her since Sarah left. I didn't know what to say. I felt like I was somehow complicit in the whole thing, like I'd failed her too. But I needed help. I needed someone who knew Sarah, someone who wasn't blinded by love or family ties, someone who could see things clearly. So I called her. It took a few tries, but she finally answered. Her voice was cold, distant. "Mark," she said, her tone flat. "Emily, it's me," I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. I know we haven't talked, but I need to see you." There was a long silence. I thought she was going to hang up. "Why?" she finally asked. "It's about Sarah," I said. "And David." I think something's not right." She hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Fine," she said. "Meet me at the Daily Grind tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp." The Daily Grind was a small coffee shop near Emily's office. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a table by the window, nursing a black coffee. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed, but she was still as sharp and intelligent as ever. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, sitting down across from her. "Don't thank me yet," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Just tell me what you think is going on." I told her everything, about my suspicions, about David's sudden success, about the feeling that something was being hidden from me. Emily listened intently, her expression unreadable. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer any words of comfort or sympathy. She just listened. When I was finished, she took a sip of her coffee and leaned back in her chair. "I've had my doubts about this whole thing from the beginning," she said. "Sarah's never been one for astrology. It just doesn't fit her personality." "Exactly," I said, feeling a surge of hope. "That's what I've been saying. It's like she's been brainwashed or something." "I don't know about brainwashed," Emily said, "but I do think something's fishy. And I'm willing to help you figure it out." "Really?" I said, my voice filled with relief. "Yeah," she said. "Sarah may have made a stupid decision, but she's still my friend, and I'm not going to let anyone take advantage of her." "So, what do we do?" I asked. Emily smiled, a rare and welcome sight. "We start digging," she said. "We find out who this Madame Evangeline is, and we find out what David's been up to, and we expose the truth, no matter what it is." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally, and together, we were going to uncover the truth. Emily was a force of nature. Once she set her mind to something, she didn't stop until she got what she wanted, and she wanted to know the truth about Sarah and David. She started by researching Madame Evangeline. It wasn't easy. The woman had no online presence, no listed address, no real credentials. She operated solely on word of mouth, catering to a small, exclusive clientele. But Emily was persistent. She tracked down some of Madame Evangeline's clients, posing as a potential customer. She asked questions, gathered information, piecing together a profile of the mysterious astrologer. What she found was disturbing. Madame Evangeline wasn't just an astrologer. She was a con artist, a manipulator, She preyed on vulnerable people, feeding them false hopes and dreams, all for a hefty price. She'd tell them what they wanted to hear, whether it was about love, money, or success. She'd offer them personalized readings and guidance, all designed to keep them coming back for more. And she was good at it. She was charming, charismatic, and incredibly persuasive. She knew how to read people, how to exploit their weaknesses, how to keep them hooked. Emily also discovered that Madame Evangeline had a history of making outrageous predictions that conveniently benefited her clients. She'd encourage them to make risky investments, to leave their spouses, to pursue their wildest fantasies, all based on the alignment of the stars. And some of them actually listened. The more Emily learned about Madame Evangeline, the more convinced she became that Sarah had been manipulated, that she'd been a victim of a sophisticated and cruel scam. But that still didn't explain David's role in all of this. Emily started investigating David's recent activities. She looked into his finances, his travel records, his phone calls. She even went through his social media accounts, searching for any clues that might shed light on his involvement. What she found was strange. David's timeline didn't quite add up. There were gaps in his schedule, inconsistencies in his stories, unexplained expenses. He claimed to be working late at the office, but his swipe card records showed that he'd left hours earlier. He said he was on a business trip, but there was no evidence of him ever leaving the city. He'd made several large cash withdrawals from his bank account, but he couldn't explain what he'd spent the money on. The more Emily investigated, the more suspicious she became. It was like David was deliberately trying to hide something. And then she found something that made her blood run cold. A series of emails between David and Madame Evangeline. Emails that suggested a much deeper connection than anyone could have imagined. Emails that hinted at a conspiracy. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront David. I needed to know the truth, straight from his mouth. I called him, told him I needed to talk. He was reluctant, but eventually he agreed to meet me at a bar near his apartment. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a table in the corner, looking uncomfortable. He avoided eye contact, fidgeting with his drink. "What's this about, Mark?" he asked, his voice guarded. "I know about Madame Evangeline," I said, cutting straight to the chase. David's face paled. He took a long sip of his drink, trying to regain his composure. "What are you talking about?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't play dumb, David," I said, my voice rising. "I know she's a fraud. I know she's been manipulating Sarah. And I think you're involved." David laughed, a nervous, forced laugh. "That's ridiculous, Mark," he said. "You're grasping at straws. You're just trying to find someone to blame for your own failures." "Am I?" I said, leaning forward. "Or are you just trying to cover your tracks? Did you pay Madame Evangeline to tell Sarah that you were soulmates? Did you orchestrate this whole thing?" David stood up, his face flushed with anger. "How dare you accuse me of something like that?" he said. "I would never do anything to hurt you, Mark. You're my brother." "Then tell me the truth," I said, my voice pleading. "Tell me what's really going on." David hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "There's nothing to tell," he said. "Sarah and I are in love. It's that simple." "It's not simple, David," I said. "It's complicated. It's messy. And it's hurting a lot of people." "I can't help that," he said. "Sometimes things just happen. Sometimes fate intervenes." "Fate?" I scoffed. "You really believe that crap?" "After everything that's happened, I believe in what I feel," he said. "And I feel like Sarah and I are meant to be together." I stared at him, searching for any sign of guilt, any hint of remorse, but all I saw was stubbornness, defiance. "I don't believe you," I said. "I think you're lying." "And I'm going to prove it," David sighed. "You're wasting your time, Mark," he said. "Just let it go. Move on. Be happy for us. Happy for you," I said, my voice filled with bitterness. "You stole my wife, my life, my happiness, and you expect me to be happy for you?" "I didn't steal anything," he said. Sarah made her own choices. She chose me because you manipulated her, I shouted. Because you lied to her. Because you cheated your way to happiness. David grabbed his jacket and stormed out of the bar. I'm done with this, he said. I'm not going to stand here and listen to your accusations. He left me sitting there, alone, filled with anger and frustration. I hadn't gotten the confession I wanted, but I knew, deep down, that I was right. David was hiding something, and I was going to find out what it was no matter what it took. Emily's investigation was getting somewhere. She was meticulous, patient, and utterly ruthless when it came to uncovering the truth. After the confrontation with David, I gave her all the information I had, no matter how insignificant it seemed. I gave her David's bank statements, his phone records, even his social media passwords, which I still had from when we used to share accounts years ago. Don't judge me. I was desperate. Emily focused on David's finances. She spent hours poring over his bank statements, looking for any unusual transactions. And then she found it. A large sum of money, a huge sum of money, had been transferred from David's account to an offshore account a few weeks before Sarah left me. The account was in the name of a shell corporation, but Emily managed to trace it back to Madame Evangeline. The connection was undeniable. David had paid Madame Evangeline. But why? Emily dug deeper, tracing the money trail. She discovered that the offshore account had been used to pay for various expenses associated with Madame Evangeline's business, including advertising, travel, and consulting fees. It was clear that David had been bankrolling Madame Evangeline, but the question was, what was he getting in return? Emily suspected that he'd paid her to manipulate Sarah, to convince her that they were soulmates, to drive her away from me and into his arms. But she needed proof. She needed something concrete, something that would stand up in court. She decided to go undercover. She booked a reading with Madame Evangeline, posing as a wealthy socialite looking for guidance in her love life. During the reading, Emily subtly steered the conversation towards David. She mentioned that she knew him, that he was a friend of a friend. Madame Evangeline's reaction was telling. She became nervous, evasive. She tried to change the subject, but Emily persisted. Finally, Madame Evangeline cracked. She admitted that she knew David, that he'd been very generous to her. She hinted that he'd asked her to help Sarah see things in a new light. It wasn't a confession exactly, but it was enough. Emily had what she needed. Emily called me immediately after her meeting with Madame Evangeline. Her voice was shaking with excitement. I've got it, Mark, she said. I've got the proof. David paid her. He paid Madame Evangeline to lie to Sarah. One couldn't believe it. It was true. All my suspicions, all my anger, all my hurt. It was all justified. How? I asked, my voice trembling. How did you find out? Emily explained everything. The offshore account, the money trail, the meeting with Madame Evangeline. I was stunned. I couldn't believe that David was capable of such a thing, that he would go to such lengths to destroy my life. What do we do now? I asked. We tell Sarah, Emily said. She deserves to know the truth. I hesitated. I didn't know if I was ready to face Sarah again, to see her, to talk to her, to relive the pain of her betrayal. But Emily was right. She deserved to know. We arranged to meet Sarah at a neutral location, a park on the outskirts of town. Emily insisted on being there for support. When Sarah arrived, she looked apprehensive. She avoided eye contact, fidgeting with her hands. What's this about? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I took a deep breath. We have something to tell you, Sarah, I said. Something about David. And Madame Evangeline. I explained everything. Slowly, carefully. I showed her the bank statements, the emails, the evidence that Emily had gathered. Sarah listened in silence, her face growing paler with each passing moment. At first, she seemed disbelieving, resistant to the truth. But as I continued to present the evidence, her defenses began to crumble. Finally, she broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the extent of David's betrayal. "No," she sobbed. "No, it can't be true. He wouldn't do that to me." "I'm sorry, Sarah," I said, my voice filled with compassion. "But it's true. David lied to you. He manipulated you. He used you." Sarah stood up, her eyes blazing with anger. "I'm going to kill him," she said, her voice trembling with rage. Emily put a hand on her shoulder. "Easy, Sarah," she said. "Don't do anything you'll regret." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. "I can't believe this," she said. "I can't believe I was so stupid, so gullible, so blind." "You weren't stupid, Sarah," I said. "You were manipulated. You were lied to. It's not your fault." "Yes, it is," she said. "I should have known better. I should have trusted my own instincts. I should have seen through his lies." She turned to me, her eyes filled with remorse. "I'm so sorry, Mark," she said. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you." I looked at her, at the pain in her eyes, at the genuine regret on her face, and for the first time in months I felt a flicker of hope. Sarah didn't waste any time. She drove straight to David's apartment and confronted him. I wasn't there, but Emily told me everything. Sarah barged in, uninvited, and threw the evidence in his face. She screamed at him, cursed at him, called him every name in the book. David initially denied everything, but Sarah wasn't buying it. She'd seen the proof. She knew the truth. Finally, he broke down. He confessed everything. He admitted that he'd paid Madame Evangeline to manipulate Sarah, to drive her away from me. He said he did it because he loved her, because he couldn't bear to see her with someone else. He said he thought it was the only way to win her over. Sarah didn't care about his excuses. She was furious. She felt betrayed, used, and humiliated. She slapped him across the face, then stormed out of his apartment, leaving him alone with his guilt and his lies. That night she called me. Her voice was trembling, filled with tears. "It's true, Mark," she said. "He did it. He paid her. He lied to me." "I know, Sarah," I said. "I know. I can't believe I was so blind," she said. "I can't believe I fell for his lies. I can't believe I hurt you so badly." "It's okay, Sarah," I said. "It's over now. You know the truth. That's all that matters." "No, it's not okay," she said. "I ruined everything. I ruined our marriage. I ruined our lives." "We can fix it, Sarah," I said, my voice filled with hope. "We can start over. We can rebuild our lives together." There was a long silence. I didn't know what she was thinking. "I don't know, Mark," she said finally. "I don't know if I deserve a second chance. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for what I've done." "You deserve a second chance, Sarah," I said. "Everyone does. And I forgive you. I forgive you for everything." Sarah moved out of David's apartment the next day. She packed her bags and left without saying a word. David tried to contact her, to apologize, to explain himself, but she refused to answer his calls or respond to his texts. She was done with him, done with his lies, done with his manipulations, done with his betrayal. She moved into a small apartment downtown, a place of her own. She needed time to heal, to process everything that had happened, to figure out what she wanted to do with her life. I didn't push her. I gave her space. I let her know that I was there for her whenever she needed me. We started talking again, slowly, cautiously. We talked about everything, the past, the present, the future. We talked about our mistakes, our regrets, our hopes, our dreams. It wasn't easy. There were awkward silences, painful memories, and lingering resentments. But we persevered. We kept talking, kept listening, kept trying to understand each other. I realized that I still loved Sarah. Despite everything that had happened, despite the pain and the betrayal, I still cared about her deeply. I saw that she was truly remorseful for what she'd done, that she regretted hurting me, that she wanted to make things right. But I also knew that things would never be the same. Our marriage had been irrevocably changed. We could never go back to the way things were before. One evening, Sarah came to my apartment. She looked nervous, hesitant. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Of course," I said, inviting her in. We sat on the couch, facing each other. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken emotions. "I wanted to apologize," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "I know I've said it before, but I wanted to say it again. I'm so sorry, Mark, for everything I've done. For hurting you, for betraying you, for ruining our marriage." "I know, Sarah," I said. "I know you're sorry, and I forgive you, but it's not enough," she said. "I want to make things right. I want to earn your forgiveness. I want to win you back." I looked at her, at the sincerity in her eyes, at the hope in her voice, and I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to give her another chance. I wanted to rebuild our lives together. But I was also scared. Scared of getting hurt again. Scared of being betrayed again. Scared of reliving the pain of the past. "I don't know, Sarah," I said. "I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Please, Mark," she said, her voice pleading. "Just give me a chance. Let me show you that I've changed, that I'm not the same person I was before." She reached out and took my hand. Her touch was warm, familiar, comforting. "I still love you, Mark," she said. "I've always loved you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." I stared at her, searching for the answer in her eyes, and I saw it: genuine love, deep remorse, and unwavering commitment. I was torn. Part of me desperately wanted to forgive Sarah, to take her back, to start over. The other part of me was terrified. I talked to Emily about it. She was supportive, as always, but she also cautioned me to be careful. "Sarah made a huge mistake, Mark," she said, "and she needs to pay the price for it. But that doesn't mean you have to take her back. You deserve to be happy, and you need to do what's best for you." I talked to my parents. They were overjoyed that Sarah wanted to come back. They'd always loved her, and they couldn't understand why we'd ever broken up in the first place. "Give her another chance, Mark," my mom said. "She's a good woman. She's just made a mistake." I talked to my friends. Some of them were supportive of the idea of reconciliation, while others were vehemently opposed. "Don't be an idiot, Mark," one of my friends said. "She cheated on you with your own brother. You can't just forgive that. You need to move on." I spent days, weeks, agonizing over the decision. I weighed the pros and cons. I analyzed my feelings. I tried to imagine my life with and without Sarah. It was the hardest decision I'd ever had to make. The truth was, I was scared of being vulnerable again, scared of opening my heart to someone who had hurt me so deeply, scared of trusting someone who had betrayed me so completely. But I also knew that I didn't want to live my life alone. I missed Sarah. I missed her laughter, her warmth, her companionship. I missed the feeling of being loved and cherished. And I knew that, deep down, I still loved her too. While I was wrestling with my decision about Sarah, David's life was falling apart. Sarah had cut him off completely. She refused to speak to him, to see him, to have anything to do with him. His friends and family were disgusted by his behavior. They couldn't believe that he would stoop so low, that he would betray his own brother in such a cruel and calculating way. He lost his job. His reputation was ruined. No one wanted to hire him. He was ostracized, isolated, and alone. He tried to apologize to me, but I refused to listen. I couldn't forgive him for what he'd done. I couldn't forget the pain he'd caused. He sank into a deep depression. He started drinking heavily. He neglected his appearance. He was a shell of his former self. One night, he got drunk and drove his car into a tree. He wasn't seriously injured, but he was arrested for drunk driving. The news of his arrest spread quickly. It was the final nail in his coffin. He lost everything: his job, his friends, his family, his reputation, his self-respect. He was completely alone. I felt a pang of sympathy for him, but I quickly pushed it aside. He deserved everything he got. He'd brought it all on himself. Months passed. Sarah continued to work on herself, to heal, to grow. She went to therapy, she volunteered at a local animal shelter. She spent time with her friends and family. She was slowly rebuilding her life. I continued to see her, to talk to her, to get to know her again. We went on walks, we had coffee, we watched movies. We were taking things slowly, one step at a time. I started to see that she had truly changed, that she was a different person than the one who had left me for my brother. She was more honest, more vulnerable, more compassionate. She was more aware of her own flaws and weaknesses. She was more committed to being a better person. One day, we were sitting on a bench in the park, watching the sunset. The sky was ablaze with color, a breathtaking display of beauty. "I've been thinking a lot about us, Mark," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "Me too," I said. "I know I hurt you deeply," she said. "And I know I can never fully make up for what I did. But I want you to know that I'm truly sorry, and that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your forgiveness and your trust." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I want to ask you something," she said. "But I want you to be honest with me, no matter what." "Okay," I said. Do you think there's a chance for us? A chance to rebuild our lives together? A chance to be happy again?" I looked at her, at the hope in her eyes, at the vulnerability in her expression, and I knew what I had to do. I took her hand in mine and I smiled. "Yes, Sarah," I said. "I do. I think there's a chance. I think we can rebuild our lives together. I think we can be happy again." I pulled her close and we kissed. It was a slow, tender kiss, filled with love and forgiveness. "But it's going to take time," I said. "It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of trust." "I know," she said, "and I'm ready for it. I'm ready to do whatever it takes." We looked at each other, our eyes filled with hope and anticipation. The future was uncertain, but we were together, and that was all that mattered.